Okay, so we're going to talk about how to set up your boards and place drawings and renders on them. But really, before we get into that, I just kind of want to go over some of the basic rules of layouts. And these rules you can see in any type of layouts, like magazine layouts, book layouts, other project boards, portfolios, architecture or not, it doesn't matter. These rules apply to all of those. They also apply to even photography as well. So I'm just going to talk about some of those through some examples of some students' work. Um, in this case, I'm just going to show you 4 boards from the AIA Committee on the Environment Top 10 student competition. Um, and each student team submits 4 boards. Anyway, we're just going to be looking at how they've laid these out, and just to give you a general sense of what's going on, and so that you guys can mimic these, and we might have you find other project boards and analyze them, how they laid them out and stuff. You guys can follow these principles and lay out your boards and your portfolio in much the same way. So um, this is the first board we're going to look at. And yeah, we're just going to be looking at how they've laid things out. There's a lot of information on here. And the first thing they show at the top of their board is a nice big render that shows pretty much the whole building, a general sense of the project. And then they start diving in here to sort of the general idea of the project. Here they're talking about making a place for refugees to stay in Spain. And so you can see in this map here, it's showing that. This is talking about the issue, this image here. And then it shows a site plan and general urban context, sort of the general environmental strategies that they're using. And then the sort of how the building relates to its urban context in this section here. So these are all, like when we look at the board here, all of this information is really general information, right? It's just general about the project. None of this is very detailed in terms of like, we're not seeing wall sections, we're not seeing how things are connected together. We're not seeing anything really specific about the building. We're just seeing sort of the general reason for it, its general location, general strategies, all sort of general, even a general view of the building up here at the top of the screen. So this is typically what you're going to see like on the first page of a portfolio. The first board is going to be all general information, and typically the sort of the lineage of information is you start at really general, broad, contextual information. So again, talking about like the location, general strategies, reasoning for the building, problems that it's addressing, stuff like that. And then we move into more technical information. Maybe the last spread we'll see is talking about like, thermal mass, radiant floor, how the shading devices are working, how the floors are connected to the walls, wall construction, material consumption, stuff like that. These are all really technical bits of information, and we're going to see those at the end of the project, because that's sort of the last thing that we talk about is this really complex, detailed information after we've provided the context for the project. So in terms of the actual layout of information and not just the information that's showed on this board or shown on this board, you can see pretty generally that there are sort of these 3 strips of information. We have the render at the top here. This is the first strip, and all of these strips are sort of consuming equal parts of the board. So we have the render here, the title, And part of that title dips down into the second strip here, which you can see sort of ends right here at the bottom of the site plan. You can see how that stuff is aligned there. You can also see how these subtitles, urban connectivity, climate data, these are totally in line with each other. Clearly they're using guidelines to sort of line this text up. And that's also aligned with the bottom of this body text here, and it's aligned with the bottom of this map of Spain. And you can see that alignment up here. The top of the site plan is aligned with the top of this text, which is aligned with the top of this diagram. So you guys can see how that's working out here. Then we have this final strip of information down here, which is this long section through the site that's showing different urban conditions around it. So you can see that these orange circles with photos in them are aligned with the top of the text here, and all of these are aligned at the same spacing, same height. Same with this text down here. This is all aligned. So you guys can see how that's working out. So again, this board is split up into 3 strips of information, 3 sections, and you can see that all of the text and all of the information is aligned with each other. And this is pretty much what we're going for. It's good to be nice and clean. This is a nice clean board, and it's nice and clean because everything is thoughtfully aligned together. There's been a lot of thought into the placement of these things, the sizing of each of these diagrams. Cropping them, you know, some of these were probably cropped, or they were designed specifically to fit in their location on the board. So these are all things you guys are going to need to be thinking about now and in the future as well, is how your diagrams and how the text is going to fit on the board in a nice cohesive region. So moving on, this board is divided into halves. And also into thirds. That's where this margin is occurring. We can already see that this image takes up half roughly of the board, and then it comes over 2/3 of the way. And you can even see that that 2/3 line, this white margin here, if we travel down, even the edge of this section happens, the edge of the building happens at that 2/3 line. So really thoughtful, right? That was definitely intentional. Again, so we have a couple renders here. These are showing sort of the approach of the building. Obviously, we're still sort of general, but we're getting a little bit closer to the building, right? You can see these plazas and entries, and that's what this site plan now. We're moving from sort of a very broad urban context site plan to a more building-oriented site plan, floor plan. And we can see how people enter into the building, and we're seeing that in the renders over here. And we're seeing some form generation diagrams here. We have some information about plant life, native plants, and some information about climate strategies and comfort zone. So a little bit more technical here. With a large section here at the bottom. But again, you can see like this notion of the strips of information again, right? We have these renders here that are aligned at the top. And the text and these form generation diagrams are scaled specifically so that they align with the bottom of the site plan here. Here's another sort of strip of information with the psychrometric chart and text about that stuff, the native plants. You can see the different environmental strategies that they're considering in their design diagrammed here. So that's all aligned, and then this section, this really large section sort of grounds the bottom of this poster. It adds some weight to it down here, just like the site plan and these renders are grounding the top of it. So. Okay, on this next board, this is again divided in half. This time that margin line is straight down the middle here. On the left side, we have an exploded floor plan, which is taking up pretty much the whole side, and that's fine. And on this other half, we have some interior renders, talking more about like water consumption, stuff like that. But again, you can see this idea of the strips of information once again, right? We have this design for wellness. The diagrams and their text are aligned with the bottom of this interior render here, and the top of that render is aligned with the top of this text. We also have this bit of information, probably being a little bit redundant for you guys now, but I just really want to nail it home. It's really important that your guys' stuff is lined up nice and neatly. That's really the whole point of all this stuff. And so this is their last board that's really talking about super detailed information. You can see these are like full wall sections with bolts and connectors and stuff all shown. And this is this board's divided in half as well. On the left side is a little bit more like diagrammatic sort of general information, and then we see on the right side how that plays out in this large perspective section. So again, you know, pretty intentional that the strategies are diagrammatic on the left side, and then we're seeing them pointed out here on the right side. So, yep, those are pretty much the general principles here, like dividing the boards in halves, dividing them into thirds. The rule of thirds is something you'll also see in photography, which is talking about like the composition of the image. Things, for whatever reason, people have figured out that images and boards and collections of images look really good when they're divided into thirds. So you guys can use that to your advantage. You can split your board up into thirds. You could do it in halves, quarters. It doesn't matter. It just needs to sort of flow with the information that you're showing, basically. And also vice versa. Typically you work your drawings and your diagrams to fit on a specific board size that you've sort of designed ahead of time, or at least thought of ahead of time. So. At any rate, we're going to talk about now how to set your guys' boards up, and I'm going to show you all the little tricks to do that. So the first thing you're going to do is open up Indesign. You'll again be greeted with this recent files menu. The first thing we're going to do, of course, is open up a new document, right? So we're going to go up to File. We're going to go New, Document. Click that. We're going to set our units here on the right side to inches, and we're going to set our width and height to whatever it's supposed to be for the assignment, or whatever you're trying to do. The margins we're going to leave the same, and page numbers or number of pages depending. This is good, and we're just going to hit create. So again, we are in our workspace now with our page. If I zoom out, hold Alt and scroll, you can see the different pages here, our 4 different pages. And I can open up the pages window here, just click that and expand it, and I can see those 4 pages there as well. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're probably going to start placing some stuff, and then we'll probably use the rulers up here to establish some guidelines to help us lay things out. Or actually, let's do that first. So we're going to start with some guidelines, and then we might move the guidelines around when we start placing drawings and stuff on here. But I'm going to start with the guidelines. So what I'm going to do is just to start out with, I'm going to make the guidelines the same on every single page so that they're all consistent in their layout, and it will just be the information that changes. That's a good starting point, and as we add information, it might, like those guidelines might need to change depending on what is on the board, depending on like what diagrams and drawings are on there. So Yeah, so first we're going to set up some guidelines. So I'm going to go over to the master page here, a master. I'm going to double click on it to go to our master page. I'm going to start drawing some guidelines. I think I'm going to divide this page into one half, a halfway mark on the vertical here, and then into thirds horizontally. So, but yeah, you can do it however you want. So how I'm going to set up these guides is I'm going to go over here to my rulers, and if you don't have your rulers shown here, you just need to come up to view, and here it says hide rulers, and that's because I have mine shown right now. If I click that, my rulers are gone. So if my rulers are gone, I go to view, and you can see here sort of towards the bottom it says show rulers, or Control R. You're just going to click that, and your rulers are going to pop up just like that. So to set up some guidelines, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here to the ruler, not on the edge, but somewhere in the middle here of the ruler. I'm going to click and drag over, and you can see this blue line. It's a guideline, and I'm going to place it here at the 12-inch mark because that's halfway on our page, right? This is sort of a free-form move, just me dragging it. You can see that little gray box next to my cursor is giving me inches readout, and some of these numbers are pretty weird, like 10.15 inches. That's not like a fractional or a fraction, a nice fraction of an inch, but if I hold shift, it snaps to fractions of inches. So you can see here like 10.75, 0.875, so that would be 7/8 of an inch, stuff like that. So if you hold shift, it's going to snap to those fractions, and it depends on your zoom. In this case, it's going to 1/8 of an inch as the tolerance. But I'm going to place it here at 12 inches because that's our midway point, and I'm just going to let go. You can see my my rulers are this light blue color, and you can change that as well. So we have one at 12, and what I'm also going to do, and what you guys should probably do, is add the margins. So we have these 1/2-inch margins here on the side of the page, which is going to separate our drawings and our renders from the edge of the sheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to use those 1/2-inch margins in as many places as possible, as what makes sense. So when I'm setting up this halfway grid line and these third of the way grid lines, or well, whatever, lines, guidelines, that's the word I'm looking for. I'm also going to add in the margins as well to space our drawings and our renders out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag some more guidelines here, holding shift, and these are 1/2-inch margins, so that means I'm going to go 1/4 inch on each side to get a 1/2 inch overall. So you can see that there. They look the same, so that's pretty good. So that's going to be our midway guideline there. So now what I'm going to do is get the thirds. So again, I'm just going to drag these down. And I'm going to go to 12 again. And then one at 24. So those are going to be our third of the way points. And again, I'm going to make sure that those are 1/2-inch margins, just like that. And the same down here. And I'm just dragging and holding shift and looking over at my ruler at the tick marks to make sure that I have it set up. And if I zoom in, you can see the units of the ruler have changed, so I can make sure that this is at 3/4 and this is 1/4, so that means there's a 1/2 in between. So just like that. So now we have these 6 boxes that we can start to lay information out onto. That is how you're going to do guidelines. So I've done that on the master page, which means if I go back to our normal pages, you can see those guidelines are on every single page, and I can't not move them either, unless I override it, and then I can move those guidelines around. So now that I have our guidelines on here, I can start placing information. So, and when I say placing, I literally mean placing. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go over here to File, and you're going to go to Place. It's about midway down here. It's also Control D. And it's going to open up your file directory, and you can start to pick out information that you want to put in here. You guys will also notice that you can place all sorts of different files. I can place any Adobe file on here that I want. They can literally just be Photoshop files. They could be Illustrator files. They don't have to be like a JPEG like this one. You can also place PDFs in there as well. But yeah, so I'm going to place a render in here. I'm just going to place in the Photoshop file. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to hit Open. And you can see here, I haven't clicked anywhere yet, and you can see a preview of that render next to the cursor. So I'm just going to click anywhere because we're just going to move it and scale it. So, and it's gigantic, so I'm going to have to scale it here. Okay, so it came in really big, and I'm going to scale it down. And how I'm going to do that again is I'm just going to hover over these corners. Once I have the drawing selected, I'm going to hover over the corner. You can see my cursor changes to the double arrow. I'm just going to click and drag, and yes, this brings me to another point. So in InDesign, when you place like drawings and renders and stuff in here, your drawings are going to have two windows. So you can see there's this blue box here. This is the crop window. So if I, scale this window down, you can see the image doesn't change, just how I've cropped it changes, right? The image is still the same size here. But I'm just cropping it. I'm just changing how much we can actually see on there. There's another window. If I double click on here, you can see now there's this sort of brownish orange box. This is the actual photo, right? So if I scale this down, it's going to scale the actual photo. So you can see how that's working. And these two boxes are independent, right? We can see the orange box here, and we can see the blue box here. They're not the same. So what you can do is, if you have a scenario like this and you're like, oh geez, how do I get it back to how it was? How do I get this blue frame box to be the same as the orange box here? It's really easy. You just need to click your drawing or your render, whatever, and you're just going to right click on it, and you're going to go here to Fitting, expand that menu. You see there's a series of different options. You have fit frame proportionately, so that's going to make the frame fit proportionally to your drawing. You can click these and sort of figure out exactly what they're doing. But what we want to do is we want to fit the frame to the content. We want to fit this blue frame to our actual render. So I'm going to click on that guy, and it fixed it. So now if I double click, the orange box is the same as the blue box. You guys can see that. So that's what we want in this case for right now. So when I'm scaling this thing down, I instead of just holding shift like that, what I actually need to do is hold control and then shift and then scale it. And that's going to allow me to scale the content and the frame at the exact same time. So this is just holding shift. It just scales the frame. If I hold control shift and I scale it down, you can see they're scaling at the same time, right? So keep that in mind. You need to hold control and shift while you're scaling. So I'm going to scale these down here. And I'm going to scale them down just until they hit my guidelines, right? So you can see here the bottom of the render is at the top of our guideline here, the top of this 1/2 inch margin. So once I've done that, I'm not scaling it to the poster. I'm not scaling it to the board because now we have this weird margin. I'm scaling it to the bottom of our, or the top of our margin, excuse me. So then what I'm going to do, now I'm going to crop it with that blue box. So I'm just going to slide that over because I know I want to crop this part of the render out. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to move this blue box edge to the edge of the sheet, or maybe to the edge of the margin here. We'll do that instead. I'll crop this out as well. So just like that. So I can use, you know, it's important to keep in mind, like, which box am I scaling? The orange box, the content, or am I scaling the frame here? You need to keep that in mind when you're doing stuff. And remember, it's Control-Shift to scale proportionately. So here we go. We have our render placed. It's at the top third. It's taking up the whole width of the board, which is fine for what I'm looking to do. So maybe if you have a square render, you know, it might fit here. You might take up, you know, 2/3 of the board. It just depends on what you're trying to do. So another thing I can do, I can preview what this board looks like. So if I want to sort of see the relationship of the white space to the render, it's a little hard now because there's like these blue guidelines and this purple stuff. It's kind of distracting. So I can get a print preview real quick, sort of like presentation mode on PowerPoint. But what you're going to do is you're going to go over here to View, and you're going to go to Screen Mode down here. Hover over that guy. And you're going to go to Presentation, which is also Shift W, right? So you can click, or you can press Shift W, and it will bring you to this preview. So you can see the relationship of our white space to the render. And we're going to check this frequently as we go along, right? Check what our stuff looks like. So if I press Shift W, it just brings that up. One thing you'll probably notice too, like, this render is really blurry. It's a really high quality render, but it's showing blurred right now, and your drawings are going to do that as well. The reason that's happening is it's just a preview of what this thing is going to look like, and it's to help speed up InDesign so that it's not lagging behind. If you want to change that, you can just go up here to View. You can go over Print Preview. Just click this guy at the very top. And you can see it restores the quality of the render to whatever it was that you set it. So you can see that there. Super high quality again. And if you want to turn it off, you just uncheck Overprint Preview under View, and it goes back to being super blurry. So okay, so we've placed our render here. Now I'm going to place some drawings down here. I think in these bottom 2/3 are going to be some diagrams that show the form, how the form was generated for this. So I'm going to go to where those files are. And here I have them as a bunch of Illustrator files. You guys are going to have yours as probably PDFs. You can do JPEGs as well. It doesn't really matter. Like if this was a form generation diagram here, this JPEG image, I would just double click that guy. Place it in here like I did the render. It's all pretty much the same. Same sort of strategy to placing stuff. So if I had a PDF like this guy, you can double click on that, and you can see here the little preview. I'm just going to click somewhere, and those drawings come up, right? You can see how that is there. So your guys' drawings are probably PDFs out of Rhino, and that's totally fine. You can just place them in here as you would anything else, and then we can check the quality by turning on the print preview, and it's pretty good. And again, you know, I can, you know, I probably only want this section, and then the plan maybe I want below that, so I'm just going to scale these up so that they're the full width of the sheet here. Move this down so it's aligned with our margin. And then I'm going to, like, I want to separate this section from the plan, but I have them in the same PDF, same file. So I can just manually crop it, and then I'll copy and paste, right? So I can just crop this guy. So it's just the section. And maybe I want to move that down to here. And then I can copy, and then I can paste in place the same section, move it down. But now I'm going to move the content inside of the frame, right? So I'm going to double click to access the content with this orange box. And I'm just going to click it. You can see I have I'm using the pan tool right now, which is this hand. If I just click that and hold shift, and I move it up, now we can see our plan, and the section is somewhere up here. So now we have our plan. I can push that down to here, and just like that. So if you have two drawings in the same file, it doesn't matter. You can just copy and paste and crop out the parts that you don't want. And then I can use Shift W and sort of check our work and see how things are lining up and how it looks overall. So I'm going to place in these diagrams. These are all different sizes, in different files. Ooh, whoops, that's not right. So I can place these in. You can see I'm just double clicking. I'm going to need these to all be smaller, but I want to scale them at the same time. That's going to make sure that they're all the same size. It's either actually not all the same size quite, but pretty close. And that's just because of what's in the Illustrator file. It's scaling them differently. But anyway, so you know, I can place in a bunch of these. And then what I can do, so I want to scale all these down. I could select all of them and do Control Shift and scale them down that way. I can also scale them all at the same time. So you can see here at our upper menu, I have this option to scale here, which are these boxes with arrows in them. If you hover over them, it tells you which direction. This is scale in the X direction, scale in the Y. Here I've activated the proportion constraint, so if I type it in the X or Y, it'll mimic it in the other direction. So for example, if I type in 75% and then I press enter, they scale down proportionally 75%. So you can see that. You can also do things that way. But at any rate, yeah, so it might also mean that I need some more guidelines in here. So if I have, now I'm treating this sort of strip in thirds. So maybe I need some guidelines that are at the third of the way on our width of the sheet here. So maybe I need to add those in. Let's see, that'll be at 8, 16. And so this is what I'm talking about. Like, it depends on the information that you're showing. You might need to add more guidelines or change them. Just where we were starting was just a general starting point overall to see or to get us started on something, and then we can adjust it as we go about. Try and get these to the same size. So I'll probably also need a guideline here that separates these 3 diagrams from these 3 diagrams. So we'll make one halfway in our 12-inch box here. So that would make it at 18. And then we'll scale these guys as well. And sometimes, like, you can see here that the frame box for this diagram is different than this guy because there's this extra shape I've added on here. So sometimes you just need to eyeball things. You can see that's kind of what I'm doing here right now, is just sort of eyeballing stuff. And I'm just dragging the mouse and holding shift, and that's allowing me to sort of get the results that I'm looking for. And the same thing over here, the box is bigger because of these little structural pieces. I can use guidelines to help me scale these to be the same as well. So I'll drag this guideline over here. Whoops. Let's get the guideline selected. Drag this guideline over to the edge of our building. Right there, it's pretty close. And then scale the drawings accordingly so that they end at the same place. So I can delete that. Maybe I need to crop some of this out. And I wouldn't want to do that in a normal situation, but just for showing you guys how to do this stuff, I will. But yeah, so there we go. Now we've laid out these 6 diagrams here. We've added some new guidelines, and we can press Shift W and see how that looks. If we need to make some adjustments, maybe move things down a little bit, we can do that. But yeah. So now I'm going to add some drawings down here, some sections. And so again, I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to find where those are. Let's see. Let's see, I'll just put this isometric in here. It's really big, so I'll scale it down first, generally, and then I'm going to bring these, the frame box sort of to the edge of the actual drawing. Just like that. Then slide it over to a corner and then scale that up. Right. And then I'll align it with our margin here and crop off that stuff. And then I had a other diagram that showed all of the little pieces in here, so, and that was something that I cropped out. So I'm just gonna copy and paste that, slide it over, and then I'm gonna double click in here to activate the content and just slide that over till I can see those guys, but they're not on the page, so let me add them in here. Here we go. Okay. So now I'll check what's going on. Okay, so you can see, you know, again, using the third of the way margin here, I've sort of ended this isometric drawing and added this other diagram here. So you guys can see how I'm using those guidelines to lay out information onto the board and make sure that everything is aligned nicely. So in essence, that's what you're going to be doing for all of your boards and your portfolio and anything that you make in InDesign. Again, you're just going to be using these guidelines to help lay out information. So yeah, and again, all of this stuff here, if I go to links and I need to edit something, you can see now all of the links in here. The render, you can see the different diagrams, the exploded isometric and stuff like that. So, and then all of these, I haven't been very good, but I should be keeping these all on the same layer. So I'm going to select all of those. And they're on this blue layer, so I don't have anything else, so I'm just going to well, here, I'll name this one drawings. I'll put all of our drawings on there. Good. And then I'll make a new one and call this one render. And I'll take this render here and move it onto the render layer. So how I do that, I just click on the render. Under layers, it shows you, well, first of all, there's this blue box around it when I select it, so it tells you that this is on the blue layer, drawings. And we can see here this blue box is filled, which means that what I've selected is on the blue layer. If I click this box and drag up, it moves it to the red layer. And we can see that here the box is now red. So all I did was I just dragged the filled box to the other layer that I want to move the object onto. So you can see how that's working. Yep, so that is how you do that.